I'm just going to start with the same damn thing that I was just talking about with Marisa, which is where do you see the overlap here between what you have been fighting for, advocating for so vocally over the last year, especially since we really saw events blow up in Ferguson and in what we're talking about right now?
Yeah, there's tons of overlap. We've seen from day one, a lot of people have tried to figure out kind of how to plug in, how do I take activism in a movement for Black lives? How do I, take what I'm passionate about, the fact that this is injustice that is occurring, the fact that I know it's racialized, but that's not my role. Like a lot of people have asked that. And the one thing I can say is, just look at what you're passionate about, look at what you care about, look at the issues that you're already working on, and just dig a little deeper. And I promise you that at the worst of the worst, at the crux, the people who are most in flux are folks who look like me. And if you mobilize and you organize around those people, then whatever work you're doing is going to plug in. So whether that be environmental work, whether you're focused on big businesses, whether you're focused on preservation of the communities and integrity, like anything that you're working on right now from, let's talk about gay rights. So anything that you're working on right now, you're going to find Black people at the crux of it, and you're going to find Black people in the most precarious positions. And I think a lot of times, I know a lot of times people go and they do these issues, and they don't actually consider the people who are most affected and most directly impacted. So, there's plenty of overlap. Whatever issue you want to look at, you can see that there are Black and brown people who are going to be affected by it and most directly impacted.
What about a division? Is there one between the Black community and the brown community, and something that is holding the two back from coordinating more?
Absolutely. There's a division between the Black and brown community the same way there's a division between the Black and white community, right? The same way there's a division between the white and brown community. The same way there's a division between rich and poor, and that's by design. So once we begin to realize that, once we begin to realize that there are direct reasons why they don't want us to see the commonalities in each other, then we can work to overcome those. Some of my greatest heroes, today is Asada Shakur's birthday, who is an amazing inspiration of mine. And she, is one of the people who directly worked with brown folks. She worked with Chicanos towards Black and brown liberation. And I think if we look back in history and we take that approach and we look at where we are now, we have to realize that something came into play that was an outside influence. There was, we can look at our movements and see that we haven't directly clashed. So there's other influences at play there, definitely. The same way, like I said, across the board, there's influences at play. But people are definitely starting to realize that, our oppressors are the same, and that if we're organizing against them, why not organize against them together? And I think that's really happening on a mass scale.
How do you point that out without having it sound conspiratorial or sinister, and and just say, this is fact, this is the way it is, this is how fear-based politics works, right? This is how division and trying to paint an other seeps into our societal structures.
I think you do the most basic thing. You look at who's oppressing you, right? You look at who's responsible for keeping you in the position that you no longer wish to be in. You look at who, maintains the power, who's controlling the power. And once you do that, you see that the people that are doing that are the same folks who, we now are the same reason why we now call Texas, Texas, right? Are the same reason why I'm able to sit here in Arizona. It's the same reason why I live in West Oakland now, and 6 young white hipster couples, and there's no other way to put it, have moved into my block, and people are advocating and actively fighting against the gentrification that's happening there. And when you look at the perpetuators of all of those crimes, we realize who they are, right? We realize it's the United States, we realize it's the government, we realize it's the 1%, it's the people with money, and we realize that all of those folks are not us. I think that's the easiest way,
They don't turn against each other either, right?
No, absolutely not.
Again, Black Lives Matter, how has the movement been able to maintain its momentum and make sure that it's not just a flash in the pan, not just a hashtag?
Yeah, sadly, I think the state of emergency that we're in right now has kind of maintained that for us. Every day, there's a new name, that's a new hashtag. Yesterday, people were, incredibly heartbroken to learn of Sandy Bland, right, who was arrested for a traffic violation and ended up hung in a jail cell after winning her dream job and moving, right? Like, that seems very suspicious. So while we're reeling from that, today we learn of another young black woman who has died in police custody again, right? So when you have that state of emergency, when, you know, the statistic that mobilized people was every 28 hours, and now we're at less than that, and you can actually watch, you know, via social media, via the panels and all of these conventions that we have right now in real time, the crisis play out before your very eyes. You know, people who thought it wouldn't touch their community, we're now having to mobilize in, you know, Denver and Minneapolis and places where people, you know, wouldn't think about an act of black resistance, but wherever black folks are, we're being oppressed and we're being killed. And that's what's happening. You know, it's a huge, I don't want to call it a help, but that you know, that helps the momentum. Like, people stay enraged because there's always something to be angry about.
And how do you compare an experience like this, right? A conference, a convention where you're meeting people, you're talking to them face to face, versus an interview that you might do on CNN, MSNBC, HuffPost Live. You know, be honest with me.
Yeah.
How much of an impact do you think that every media appearance you do really has? Because on one hand, the media is often criticized for not covering the right issues, not covering them enough, focusing too much on other things. But does it also have the power that it used to, or has that moved on to a different sphere too? By that I mean traditional media, I would say, probably.
Yeah.
Like broadcast.
I don't even know what traditional media is anymore, to be honest with you. When I see people who call themselves journalists or writers and literally all they do is copy and paste tweets from people such as myself, like, I question that, right? Like, I'm not necessarily sure that's journalism. And it seems like that's the majority of what's out there right now. You know, like, print media is, you know, fairly dead. Basically, it's a dead medium. Everything is online, and even now, like I said, we're seeing, you know, clickbait, and we're seeing very flash in the pan, you know, tweets, basically just like best hits of the internet that day being called journalism, right? So I don't even look to those mediums anymore. I do see the relevance in that, or I just see, you know, like, a value in them for people who do go to them, like my parents, for example. You know, they didn't know what was going on, even though I was out, like, on West Florissant, like, screaming and yelling, and, you know, like, they called me 2 weeks later, like, you heard about this Mike Brown thing? And I'm like, yo, I know we don't talk that often, but, like, where are y'all getting y'all news from, right? But they were turning on, you know, the 10 o'clock news, they were turning on the 7 a.m. news, and they weren't getting the real true story. So I'm not sure how much it helps other than just putting a face in front of people, but I do think that is important, right? Like, I think as a young black queer woman, I think it's important for people to hear me talk about the relevance of black lives versus, you know, a cishet man in a suit that they've seen for years and years and years and years and years, and they haven't gotten, you know, anywhere because that's been the face of it. But when you put a new face on it and you say, these are the people that are fighting for black lives, and yes, you know, when we say black lives, we mean all black lives. We mean immigrant black lives, we mean gay, LGBTQ black lives, right? We mean poor, we mean rich, we mean all black lives. And taking that framework, I think putting the face on it is where the real value comes in, not necessarily the medium that you use.
Mm-hmm. My parents do the same thing all the time, I gotta say. It's frustrating when you're trying to advocate for something or push for something.
They're just old.
And they're just a little late to the game. Finally, Black Twitter.
Yes.
Is that something that that in particular is very strong and only works in that community? I mean, what's the secret of the way in which it's able to really manifest so much discussion and action?
Absolutely. Black Twitter is amazing. If you are on Twitter, I'm Brown Blaze. Feel free to say anything dope that I might say, like, quote it, because I don't really remember. So I like to have that archive for myself. So all y'all are gonna do my grunt work. If I say anything brilliant, get it out there. Black Twitter is phenomenal. You know, I think it's really become a space where people have not only go to get informed, but they also go to get galvanized and figure out, what's happening in their cities. We've really utilized that space in a really dope way for, minute by minute updates, information, but also to help, get people into a space and call mass rallies so that folks can connect, so that folks can do direct action, so that people can meet up with folks that, aren't in organizations that care about these issues right now and start to organize around them. And, I'm not sure why Black Twitter is so powerful, other than like Black folks are just powerful as hell. Like, that's really it. Honestly, because we're not a majority anywhere we go. So it's amazing to see the sway that people have, but I think it speaks to the power of the moment we're in right now, for how Black Twitter, is utilized. And I can give a direct example with the recent church burnings. People were really upset with the national media coverage, right? Like the mainstream media coverage, the lack thereof, the framework they were taking, all of the questions like, well, what if God himself sent that lightning bolt to the church? How do we really know? Why are we calling this terrorism? What if, the electric, it's like, come on, we've seen this before. Please stop trying to play us out of our experience and tell us what is happening, right? So that's what was happening in the mainstream media. And when we saw that happening, and this was, not a single group that put this out, this was not an organization, it was just a bunch of young Black Twitter users that got together and said at 7 p.m., we're gonna just storm Twitter. And all you're gonna see is who is burning Black churches. And then that next day, once again, the mainstream media had no choice but to take those tweets that said, who is burning Black churches, and then that was their framework. And it wasn't, it didn't allow space for them to excuse it away with natural causes or, weird circumstances. It was like, no, who is burning Black churches? Because we know this is a deliberate act. We've seen it before. So I think, it's Black Twitter for me, it's a perfect online embodiment of like what is happening on the ground, just like the power of people all pushing towards one thing, and really focusing and honing in on it. And you see that day to day with the things that Black Twitter is raising up and the way that we're mobilizing online.
And I think that's what Netroots is trying to do too, right? I mean, in every sense of the word, is using the community, the internet, for all of its glory, to try to force something into the conversation. Everyone else has to listen and react to that now. Ashley, thanks so much for being here.
No, thank you for having me.